The studio hummed with anticipation as the audience settled into their seats for another episode of Stephen Colbert's late-night talk show. The guest tonight was none other than Donald Trump, a figure whose mere presence could ignite a room with equal parts curiosity and contention. Colbert, known for his sharp wit and ability to navigate tricky conversations, had prepared meticulously. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, a flicker of unease lingered. Trump was unpredictable. A wildcard who thrived on deflection and provocation. What could possibly go wrong? Could Colbert maintain his composure against a guest who seemed to revel in chaos? Or would the night spiral into something neither could control? The segment began smoothly enough. Colbert opened with a monologue, weaving humor with pointed jabs at recent political developments. The crowd laughed, clapped, and leaned forward, sensing the undercurrent of tension as Trump's name loomed closer. When the former president finally strode onto the set, his trademark swagger filled the space. He waved, grinned, and settled into the guest chair, exuding confidence. Colbert greeted him with a smile that was equal parts welcoming and wary, launching into light banter about Trump's latest ventures. The audience chuckled, but the air felt charged, as if everyone knew this was merely the calm before the storm. The conversation soon shifted to a topic dominating headlines: the ongoing debate over social media regulation and free speech. Colbert, ever the provocateur, framed his question carefully, asking Trump about his stance on tech companies moderating content, particularly in light of recent controversies surrounding misinformation. Was Trump, Colbert probed, truly committed to unrestricted speech, or was his rhetoric just a convenient shield for personal gain? The question was loaded, designed to elicit a response that could be dissected for humor or insight. Trump leaned back, his expression unreadable, and began to answer, his voice steady but laced with an edge. As Trump spoke, he painted himself as a defender of open discourse, railing against what he called the censorship of conservative voices. His words were familiar, echoing sentiments from countless rallies and interviews, but Colbert wasn't content to let the answer slide unchallenged. He pressed further, citing examples of inflammatory posts that had been flagged or removed, asking if Trump believed there should be no limits, even when words incited division. The audience shifted, sensing the shift in tone. Trump's smile tightened and his responses grew sharper, accusing Colbert of siding with the tech elites. Was Colbert, Trump implied, just another mouthpiece for the establishment, cloaking his bias in comedy? The exchange grew heated, each man digging in. Colbert, with his knack for incisive humor, landed a particularly biting remark about Trump's own history of dodging accountability online. The audience erupted in laughter, but Trump's eyes narrowed. He countered with a jab at Colbert's ratings, suggesting the host was desperate for relevance. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others murmuring in discomfort. The line between playful sparring and genuine animosity blurred. Why was this escalating so quickly? Could either man back down without losing face? The stage was set for a confrontation that would push boundaries, and the audience could feel it. Colbert, sensing the moment, leaned forward, ready to steer the conversation into deeper waters, unaware that Trump was already plotting his next move. The tension in the studio thickened as Stephen Colbert leaned forward, his eyes locked on Donald Trump. The audience, still buzzing from the sharp exchange of jabs, held their breath, sensing the conversation teetering on the edge of something explosive. Colbert, undeterred by Trump's earlier dig at his ratings, pivoted the discussion to a more pointed angle of the social media debate: the role of public figures in amplifying divisive rhetoric. He framed his next question with surgical precision, asking Trump how he justified his own posts, which often fueled outrage and polarized followers. The host's tone was calm but unrelenting, his words carrying the weight of a challenge that demanded a serious response. Trump, however, was in no mood to be cornered. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes glinting with defiance. He launched into a spirited defense, claiming his online presence was a necessary counterbalance to a media landscape he deemed hostile and biased. His voice rose as he accused tech companies of targeting him unfairly, silencing his message while allowing others to spread what he called lies. The audience was split, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances. Colbert, sensing an opportunity, interjected with a quick-witted remark about the irony of Trump complaining about censorship while dominating every news cycle. The crowd roared with laughter, but the former president's expression darkened. What followed was a rapid-fire back and forth, each man refusing to yield. Colbert pressed Trump on specific instances where his posts had been flagged for misleading claims, asking if he took responsibility for the consequences of his words. Trump deflected, accusing Colbert of cherry-picking examples to fit a narrative. The host, unfazed, doubled down, citing a recent controversy where Trump's comments on a social platform had sparked heated protests. The question hung in the high air: did Trump see himself as a leader who united, or one who thrived on division? The studio grew quieter, the audience hanging on every word, aware that this was no longer just a talk show segment, but a high-stakes verbal duel. Trump's patience began to fray. His responses grew curt, his gestures more animated. He pointed a finger at Colbert, his voice booming as he accused the host of hypocrisy, claiming Colbert's own show peddled biased commentary under the guise of entertainment. The accusation landed like a grenade, and the audience gasped. Colbert, though visibly rattled, maintained his composure, countering with a sharp quip about Trump's aversion to scrutiny. But the former president wasn't done. He leaned forward, his tone dripping with disdain, and delivered a cutting remark. He called Colbert a second-rate comedian who hid behind a desk while pretending to understand the real world. The insult was raw, unfiltered, and deliberately personal, designed to sting. The crowd erupted, some cheering Trump's audacity, others booing his rudeness. Colbert's smile faltered for a split second, a flicker of vulnerability betraying his polished facade. The studio felt like a pressure cooker, the air heavy with the weight of the confrontation. The host, sensing the need to regain control, attempted to steer the conversation back to policy. But Trump was relentless, his confidence surging. He doubled down, mocking Colbert's attempts to challenge him as feeble and predictable. The audience was riveted, torn between discomfort and fascination as the argument spiraled. Colbert, his face tight with determination, prepared to fire back, knowing he couldn't let Trump's attack go unanswered. The stage was a battlefield, and the next move would determine who held the upper hand. The studio crackled with raw energy as Stephen Colbert absorbed Donald Trump's biting insult. The audience, caught in a whirlwind of cheers and boos, watched intently as the host's composure wavered, his jaw tightening under the weight of Trump's scathing remark. Calling him a second-rate comedian was more than a jab. It was a calculated strike meant to undermine Colbert's authority in his own domain. Yet Colbert was no novice to verbal sparring. He straightened in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to reclaim the narrative. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the confrontation was far from over, each person wondering how the host would counter such a personal attack. Colbert chose his next words with care, his voice steady but laced with an edge of defiance. He pivoted the conversation back to the core issue, challenging Trump's claim to be a champion of free speech by questioning his selective outrage. Why, Colbert asked, did Trump decry censorship only when it affected him, while remaining silent on cases where his allies suppressed dissenting voices? The question was a direct hit, designed to expose contradictions in Trump's stance. The audience murmured, some nodding in approval, others waiting for Trump's inevitable counterpunch. The former president's face hardened, his fingers tapping, the armrest as he listened, clearly bristling at the accusation. Trump's response was swift and unrelenting. He dismissed Colbert's question as a distraction, accusing the host of twisting facts to fit a liberal agenda. His voice grew louder, more commanding, as he painted himself as a victim of a coordinated effort to silence his influence. The audience was divided, with pockets of applause clashing against murmurs of dissent. Trump, sensing the room's energy, leaned into his attack, mocking Colbert's attempt to play moral arbiter. He suggested with a smirk that the host was out of his depth, more suited to telling jokes than debating serious issues. The crowd gasped at the audacity, the insult landing like a slap in the face. Colbert, though stung, refused to back down. He fired back with a pointed remark about Trump's reliance on bluster over substance, his tone sharp enough to cut through the noise. The audience roared, some cheering the host's resilience, others fueling the chaos with jeers. The exchange escalated into a rapid volley of accusations, each man raising the stakes. Colbert questioned Trump's credibility, citing his history of dodging accountability. Trump retorted by accusing Colbert of pandering to a room full of sycophants who laughed on cue. The studio felt like it was teetering on the edge of pandemonium, the line between debate and personal vendetta all but erased. As the argument reached a fever pitch, Trump delivered a line that silenced the room. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous, and accused Colbert of being a coward who hid behind his platform while real leaders faced the world's scrutiny. The words were cruel, designed to humiliate, and they hit their mark. Colbert's face flushed, a rare crack in his polished exterior. The audience fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. For a fleeting second, it seemed Trump had seized control, his dominance palpable. Colbert, however, was not finished. His eyes burned with resolve as he gathered himself, determined to turn the tables. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and the next move would either break the stalemate or push the night into uncharted territory. The silence in the studio was deafening, the air heavy with the aftershock of Donald Trump's vicious accusation. Calling Stephen Colbert a coward had been a deliberate escalation, a verbal dagger meant to unravel the host's confidence in front of a live audience. Colbert sat motionless for a heartbeat, his face a mask of barely concealed fury. The crowd, sensing the gravity of the moment, waited with bated breath, their earlier cheers and boos replaced by an uneasy hush. Trump leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips, confident he had landed a decisive blow. But Colbert was not one to crumble under pressure, and the fire in his eyes signaled he was far from defeated. With a slow, deliberate breath, Colbert regained his footing. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but laced with a steely resolve that commanded attention. He addressed Trump's insult head-on, acknowledging the attempt to belittle him, but turning it into a broader point about leadership. True courage, Colbert argued, wasn't about hurling insults or dodging accountability, but about facing tough questions with honesty. He pivoted back to the social media debate, accusing Trump of using free speech as a shield to avoid responsibility for the chaos his words often sparked. The audience erupted in applause, their support bolstering Colbert's momentum. Trump, however, was undeterred. His smirk faded, replaced by a scowl as he sensed the tide shifting. He interrupted Colbert mid-sentence, his voice booming as he accused the host of grandstanding for applause. The former president doubled down, claiming Colbert's entire show was a charade, a platform for smug elites to mock those who dared to challenge the status quo. The accusation was laced with venom, and Trump punctuated it with a rude jab, suggesting Colbert's career thrived on pandering to a room full of sheep. The crowd gasped, the insult raw and personal, cutting deeper than anything before. Some audience members jeered, others clapped, the room a cauldron of conflicting emotions. Colbert's composure wavered, the sting of Trump's words evident in the tightening of his jaw. Yet he refused to let the insult derail him. He leaned forward, his tone sharp and unyielding, and challenged Trump to explain how his rhetoric united rather than divided. The question was a gauntlet, thrown down with precision to force Trump into a corner. The former president, caught off guard, stumbled through a response, his usual bravado faltering as he struggled to justify his approach. The audience sensed the shift, their murmurs growing louder as Colbert pressed his advantage, exposing cracks in Trump's armor. The confrontation reached a new intensity, each man locked in a battle of wills. Colbert, fueled by the audience's support, landed a series of pointed remarks that painted Trump as a provocateur who thrived on conflict. Trump, his frustration mounting, fired back with accusations of bias, claiming Colbert was no better than the media outlets he criticized. The exchange was relentless, a verbal chess match with no clear victor. As the segment neared its breaking point, Trump's patience snapped. He rose from his chair, his face flushed, and declared he was done with Colbert's ambush. The audience gasped as he stormed toward the exit, leaving the host stunned and the room in chaos. Colbert, caught off guard, scrambled to regain control, his voice rising as he called after Trump, determined not to let the night end in defeat. The studio descended into a frenzy as Donald Trump stormed off the set, his abrupt exit leaving a void that pulsed with shock and disbelief. The audience erupted, a chaotic mix of cheers, boos, and stunned murmurs filling the air. Stephen Colbert sat frozen for a moment, his eyes tracking Trump's retreating figure, the weight of the moment crashing over him. The former president's declaration that he was done with the ambush hung like a dark cloud, a final jab that threatened to define the night. Colbert's mind raced. He had pushed hard, but had he gone too far? The crowd's energy was electric, demanding a response, and the host knew he had seconds to salvage the segment or risk being overshadowed by Trump's dramatic departure. Colbert rose from his desk, his movements deliberate, his face a blend of resolve and indignation. He addressed the audience directly, his voice cutting through the noise with a clarity that commanded attention. He acknowledged Trump's exit, framing it not as a victory for the former president, but as a refusal to engage with accountability. The crowd roared in support, their applause fueling Colbert's momentum. He seized the moment to pivot, turning the confrontation into a broader commentary on the dangers of unchecked rhetoric in public discourse. His words were impassioned, striking a chord with those who had felt the sting of division in recent debates over free speech and responsibility. Yet even as Colbert spoke, the shadow of Trump's insult lingered. The accusation of being a coward, coupled with the rude jab about pandering to sheep, had cut deeper than he cared to admit. The host's delivery, though powerful, carried a trace of vulnerability, a reminder that the confrontation had been personal as well as ideological. The audience, caught up in the emotion of the moment, leaned into his words, some wiping tears, others nodding in solidarity. Colbert's ability to channel the night's chaos into a rallying cry was a testament to his skill, but the cost was evident in the tightness of his smile. As he continued, Colbert deftly wove humor back into his monologue, using self-deprecation to diffuse the tension. He joked about the empty guest chair, suggesting it might be more cooperative than its former occupant. The audience laughed, the mood lightening, but the undercurrent of intensity remained. Colbert's message was clear. The fight for truth and accountability didn't end with one guest's exit. He challenged the audience to question the narratives they encountered, to hold leaders to a higher standard. The room vibrated with energy, the crowd hanging on his every word, united in a shared sense of purpose. The segment drew to a close with Colbert standing at the center of the stage, his posture defiant, his voice steady. He thanked the audience, not just for their support, but for bearing witness to a night that laid bare the stakes of public discourse. The applause was thunderous, a cathartic release of the tension that had built over the hour. Colbert had turned a near disaster into a triumph, reclaiming the narrative and emerging stronger. But as the cameras panned across the cheering crowd, a question lingered. Would Trump's exit be the final word, or merely a prelude to further clashes? Colbert, sensing the moment's weight, prepared to wrap the show, determined to end on a note of unity and resolve. The thunderous applause enveloped Stephen Colbert as he stood at the center of the stage, the audience's fervor a lifeline after the chaotic confrontation with Donald Trump. The empty guest chair, a silent testament to the night's upheaval, seemed to loom behind him, but Colbert's presence commanded the room. His ability to transform Trump's dramatic exit into a powerful statement had shifted the narrative, turning a potential defeat into a moment of moral clarity. The crowd, still buzzing with emotion, hung on his every gesture, their cheers a mix of admiration and relief. Yet beneath his steady exterior, Colbert grappled with the lingering sting of Trump's personal attacks, the rude insults that had sought to diminish him in his own domain. As the applause began to fade, Colbert transitioned into the final segment of the show, his voice carrying a blend of conviction and warmth. He chose not to dwell on Trump's departure, instead focusing on the broader implications of their clash. He spoke of the responsibility that came with influence, whether wielded by a politician, a comedian, or an everyday citizen. His words were measured but impassioned, urging the audience to engage critically with the world around them, to challenge divisiveness with reason and empathy. The room grew quieter, the crowd absorbing the weight of his message, some nodding in silent agreement, others visibly moved. Colbert's tone softened as he shared a rare personal reflection, admitting that the night had tested him. Without naming Trump's insults directly, he alluded to the challenge of facing personal attacks while striving to uphold a higher standard. The vulnerability in his voice was subtle but unmistakable, drawing the audience closer, forging a connection that transcended the usual host-viewer dynamic. The studio felt intimate, as if Colbert were speaking to each person individually, inviting them to share in the struggle of navigating a polarized world. The crowd responded with a swell of applause, their support a balm for the night's earlier wounds. To lighten the mood, Colbert slipped back into his comedic roots, delivering a series of sharp, self-aware jokes about the absurdity of hosting a show where guests could storm off mid-segment. The laughter that followed was cathartic, a release of the tension that had gripped the room. Yet even in humor, his message remained clear. The work of fostering understanding was ongoing, and every voice mattered. He praised the audience for their energy, their willingness to grapple with tough issues, and their refusal to let one disruptive moment define the night. The crowd cheered, their unity palpable, a stark contrast to the division Trump's presence had threatened to amplify. As the segment neared its end, Colbert prepared to close the show with a gesture of defiance and hope. He stood taller, his voice rising with a quiet power, and declared that no single argument, no matter how heated, could silence the pursuit of truth. The statement was a direct rebuke to Trump's tactics, a refusal to let the former president's exit overshadow the night's deeper purpose. The audience rose to their feet, their ovation a resounding endorsement of Colbert's resilience. The stage, once a battleground, now felt like a beacon of possibility, a space where ideas could clash and still lead to progress. Colbert, his resolve unshaken, readied himself for the final moment, determined to leave the audience inspired. The standing ovation washed over Stephen Colbert like a tide, the audience's unwavering support a powerful affirmation of the night's hard-won triumph. The studio, once fractured by the fiery clash with Donald Trump, now pulsed with a shared sense of purpose. Colbert stood at the heart of it, his presence steady and commanding, the empty guest chair behind him no longer a symbol of defeat, but a marker of resilience. The crowd's cheers carried a raw, emotional weight, a collective release after the roller coaster of confrontation and redemption. Colbert, his eyes bright with gratitude, absorbed the moment, knowing the night had been a crucible that tested his mettle and emerged stronger. As the applause began to settle, Colbert launched into his final remarks, his voice a blend of conviction and sincerity. He spoke not of Trump's exit or the personal barbs that had cut deep, but of the power of dialogue, even when fraught with tension. He framed the evening as a reminder that truth could withstand chaos, that ideas could prevail over ego. His words resonated with a quiet intensity, striking a chord with an audience still reeling from the emotional highs and lows. Some wiped tears, others clapped softly, their faces reflecting a mix of pride and inspiration. The studio felt alive, unified in a way that transcended the earlier discord. Colbert's closing was deliberate, a call to action disguised as gratitude. He thanked the audience for their courage in engaging with difficult topics, for refusing to shy away from the messiness of public discourse. His tone grew warmer, almost confessional, as he acknowledged the privilege and burden of his platform. The vulnerability he had shown earlier now became a strength, a bridge to the crowd that made his message universal. He urged them to carry the night's lessons beyond the studio, to challenge division in their own lives with the same tenacity they had witnessed. The room erupted in applause, the sound swelling with a fervor that felt transformative. To seal the moment, Colbert leaned into his signature humor, delivering a light-hearted jab at the unpredictability of live television. The laughter that followed was joyous, a final release that cleansed the lingering tension. Yet even in jest his resolve shone through. He declared the show a victory, not for himself, but for the idea that honest conversation could still matter. The audience roared. Their cheers a testament to the night's journey from confrontation to catharsis. Colbert's triumph was not in outwitting Trump, but in reclaiming the stage as a space for truth and connection, a feat that left the crowd exhilarated. As the cameras panned across the cheering audience, Colbert took a final bow, his smile genuine, his posture unbowed. The show closed with a swell of music, the lights dimming as the crowd's energy lingered. The night had been a gauntlet, marked by Trump's rude insults, his dramatic exit, and the raw intensity of their clash. But it ended in triumph. Colbert had faced the storm and emerged not just unscathed, but elevated, his message resonating long after the broadcast faded. The audience left inspired, their faith in the power of ideas restored, ready to carry the night's fire into the world. The story was complete, a testament to resilience with no loose ends to unravel.